intern of like 2023, is it just going to be that similar format?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the same format as in the past. IDs, maybe six or so, something like that, concepts, and then you briefly identify them, fit them how they fit in the course, and comment about anything more general would be fine. The second half, or the second part, which I think it counts 60%, is the essay, and there are usually two types of topics, two topics, and you can write on either one. You just choose one and write on that one for, I would say aim for roughly 60% of your time and space to write about that second essay. So think about it a little bit first, make a little outline, think of the big points you want to make, and then how you draw on maybe one or a conflict among big issue that's important among the different authors that we're reading, and then how they fit together, and where and that is how can we resolve a conflict? And I'll give you the answer right here. The general idea is not to say that one is right and the other is wrong. Most of these readings are here because these people are smart, and they're usually right, but often in a different context. Like it may work in the mid-19th century, but not in the 20th century, or it may imply that it works well in very poor countries where people they're barely eating, they're almost starving, they steal almost just to get food and so forth. Imagine you're in Gaza right now, and you live a different life than if it's, what kind of toothpaste should I use, and what kind of perfume, etc. Or beyond that, you're not thinking of beauty or health or brushing your teeth. You're thinking, we had a student who did I had a Chinese MA thesis here, and he had the topic before he learned about what we're doing here at all. He had the topic of, there was a term for it in China, which is has a traditional meaning, but it's basically non-material conceptions or fear, or it's almost the people. It was a website. It's a social media location. The people who were the leaders and active within it tend to be photographers, and they post a lot about photographers, and they say, and one thing they talked about a lot was beauty. The aesthetic elements is what they're really talking about, and what they are totally refusing, they will not post on the website if anybody does what is called, the term was invented, I'll ask you here, conspicuous consumption. Where's that term come from? You're on. It's widely used just as common English. Thorstein Veblen was a professor here at the University of Chicago around 1900, and he wrote about institutional dynamics. That is, it's very different from neoclassical Adam Smith kind of market analysis. What Thorstein Veblen did was closer to sociology or history or parts of political science. But when he made fun of or he criticized was around 1900, 1890, 1900. There were lots of people who previously, most of the 18th, 19th century in America, everybody was a small farmer. Nobody was very rich. Nobody was really very poor. They're all about the same. And then around 1880, 1870, they started building railroads. They started to use petrochemical. They were digging out oil. these things were leading to Rockefeller, to Mellon. I mean, these huge fortunes. These people were, you know, the richest people maybe in the world at the time. Maybe not as much as the King of England, but they were huge. And then they started to do things like the Europeans had done, which was build castles. Okay, when Americans said, building a castle, this is America, you know, and so that, you know, so they were criticized politically and socially, and then they tore down the castles, or they gave them over to hospitals, or they gave them to the Catholic Church, and they now a few of them are still standing around, but nobody had an idea that these things were built. Places like Newburyport, where former President Obama, you know, had a house there, huge house. And look at the flack he has gotten for being was a relatively poor guy. Was his wife, African American. They did very well. They made a lot of money, and so they've gotten a big house. Okay, this is a quintessential example of conspicuous consumption. You don't just say people, I am now confident, or I'm successful, or I'm whatever. I'm going to show you my wealth in a physical structure that you can see, and it's sometimes otherwise also called, some of the older European countries wouldn't call it that. They'd say this is new rich or nouveau riche, using the French version of something like that. The Italians, the French, Germans sometimes talk more about this. Americans in general. I visited, for instance, people wanted to offer me a job at the University of Houston. And they drove me around and said, well, yeah, this is Houston. Now, I'll show you shit downtown. So the guy recently come from Harvard, and he knew the layout. So he found, okay, here we are on this block. These people made their money 7 years ago. Let me get to the next block. These people made their money 5 years ago. These people made their money 3 years ago. So they live on different blocks. I never heard that in any other city before, but that the degree, instead of just saying nouveau riche, okay. So my point is, these kinds of, so what I'm making here is the Chinese website said, this is a crude form of using a picture, or using a ring, or using a castle to symbolically, or maybe that's not even symbolic. If we take something which is more symbolic, such as you go to the museum and you know the aesthetics of that. That is you have an MD, or you have an MBA. So you think you may act, and people may treat you as you're more educated, because our term now it's now being criticized a lot more in the last decade or two, is Ivy League. Okay, so Chicago in that sense is good. We're not the Ivy League, but we're better than they are. Okay, in our own ways. Okay, so my co-author, Dan Silvers from California. He went to Berkeley, and he's borderline Rhodes Scholar type, brilliant guy. He's very, very modest, and I used to sort of watch the way he would talk about everything with research assistants, with people, and so forth. And he has a wonderfully egalitarian style, and I'm assumed that this came from California people, and he's sensitive to it. But and I would say Chicago here still is relatively egalitarian. If you go, say, in the talk to older, more senior people at Harvard, and all the more, let's say in France or Germany, talk to older senior faculty, they would act in a way that they would expect a considerable amount of deference. So that you go to the Asians, so they would, when I was there with Yoshiaki Kobayashi, professor at Keio University. So we were taking me around. We were going to different government agencies, foundations, different government officials. So you know this is probably a 15-degree person. So we bow like this. This person maybe 45 degrees. So we bow in that person. So and that kind of thing was registering in the amount of deference. So I'm simply pointing out that these ways of using money or family background or how you speak with or without an accent, these kinds of things are used with people like Pierre Bourdieu write about a lot. And this is an extension of the kinds of things that Thorstein Veblen wrote about. Where do these fit with our course? Run into stuff like this anywhere? What kind of analysis here are we illustrating or looking for? Political culture, urban innovation, consumption and urban scenes, the city's an entertainment machine. These are filled with propositions, examples. Ed Glazer has a long paper on amenities and how and why amenities really are important. Then here were a couple of great PhDs. Elizabeth Curran. The book was published as called The Warhol Economy, and she danced in New York City clubs to learn how nightlife spurs contacts and styles in fashion, music, and art. Anybody take a look at that? You want to talk about that? I'm giving you an example of how these things connect with Thorstein Veblen. Yeah.
Well, I kind of thought that was interesting because just like tying that into like the reading on Bohemian cultural scenes in China, kind of how it's like this intersection of culture and economics, and how sometimes like focusing on the more cultural side of things and creating these spaces can in turn help economics, and how that can, like, that's kind of been a center focus for urban research recently.
Exactly. So she what was the year on this for her? I left the date off. It must be 15 years ago or so. This was a very cutting edge kind of thing. I mean, to have a book called The Warhol Economy was okay. But just to add one or two more sentences, which she would learn, and she didn't realize that this would happen, but people would sit in it. Well, first of all, she has a lot of sections in the book of how much trouble it was to get tickets or to get someone to invite you to take you in as a guest to go to some of these either private clubs or nightclubs, which are very special and hard to get into. So then she managed to get there, but then people would be high-level people, for instance, in New York, designers of women's clothes or shoes or sweaters or dresses, or people who are buyers for a big company, and they would buy different styles of clothes. So she's dancing really well, and that dress looks terrific. I'm going to order 1,000 of those. So they're making economic decisions, and then they listen to the music. Say, that's an interesting beat. Listen to that. I could use that, So they'd hear things either explicitly like this, or indirectly. There were applications of that sort. So the point is, creativity in an aesthetic sense was on the dance floor. And so what she had not thought of, and I don't think I've seen it so nicely articulated, was that people who were doing very contemporary, new styles of dresses, of music, and of art. So new paintings, new types of taking photographs, new themes, new combinations of colors, these kinds of things would sometimes crisscross all three of these. So the idea, I mean, I put this on the, if it's still there. Yeah. You remember what I put on the screen from last time? It's called the George Pompidou Center in Paris. It was like Chicago. In Chicago, we have the okay, this is a slightly different one, I think. So, or no, maybe it's the same one. I'll show you just one or two more here for fun. Okay, this is one of my professors, Paul Lazarsfeld, PhD in math. In Vienna, his mother was connected to high-level people in the Socialist Party, which was Marxist, strictly Marxist at the time. He assumed because he was Jewish he couldn't get a job at the university. I don't think he even tried. So he was trying to find ways of getting people to join the Socialist Party. And so he was doing things that were sort of social, psychological, but ways of mobilizing people that would be, and so you can imagine things like that. 1933, he went to New York, roughly. I'm not sure if it was 33 or 34. He showed up and he got, so he was looking around for things to do. So he thought initially, he'd try to mobilize for leftist parties, something like that, Communist Party, the Democratic Party, do something like that. After a couple of months, he's going, it's not going to work here. It's totally different. And he started working actively on quantifying core elements of social science and policy. He started with others, people like Gallup, survey research. They didn't exist before that. Mid-1930s, nobody did surveys. Marketing, consumer preferences, voting, local specifics. Why do people buy tomato soup? But then he would publish a paper called The Art of Asking Why. And the quick answer was, don't ask why. That's too loose and open-ended, and you'll just get people scattershot answers. So he said, try such things as compare the results you get if you ask a more open question, such as, why do you like soup, or where do you like soup, and then which soups and why? Or you can have it highly structured, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. You've done all these for years in your classes, but these things were not done in the past. So the studies of doing surveys, which we now hear reported every 2 or 3 days for presidential election. And as I mentioned, the first president that started doing daily surveys was Ronald Reagan. Lazarsfeld and these people started this, so there were people around when I was a grad student. You see people using this kind of stuff. So, for instance, there was a group that was hired. Yeah. Someone was working for the Democrats in California, and Richard Nixon heard about it, and he got the report, and he read through it, but Nixon had enough of a tricky-dicky style, was that he assumed, at least the story was told, that the Democrats just gave him this, and what it did was local surveys. Each county in California, what were the big issues, and what position should you take, because you'll have more people who will support you. So Trump and Harris are doing this right now. Okay. So the story was at least that Tricky Dicky got the report and did the opposite, so he lost the election. It wasn't the Tricky, it was actually stolen by his staff from the Democrats. And the Democrats won the election by doing what they should have done, whereas Tricky Dicky did the opposite. Okay, so the measuring where and how and why different kinds of, that is, he was interested in, he'd use his mathematical background to try to say, how can we do it? I mean, he didn't have advanced fancy equations, but he would say, we want to do this in a clear, crisp, scientific way. I mean, how can we build science out of this sloppy stuff? And he did this in field after field after field, and he had fun doing it. So that, I love this photo because you can see that he'd usually talk, with grad students. I get a new grant. How can we use the money? He said, it doesn't matter what we asked for. We want to do something creative, and et cetera, et cetera. And so he okay. The point is, the bigger point I'm making, I'm illustrating from this, was that most of what he was studying was about consumption. It was not about production. That is, he got the money. The question is how to do it in a way, and he studied. So one person who he really worked with seriously was the director. It was initially then the director of research of CBS, Columbia Broadcasting. It's now it's a big television. So it was only a radio station at the beginning, but they started to try to analyze, which programs were popular and why, and then they do surveys of this. So then, but they wanted to do it in terms of actually linking this with values, with decisions, and more. So he connected this with seminars and things that they'd have at Columbia University. But at the same time, they had money to do research on the media, the new media. And when the CBS guy was director of research, he became president of CBS afterward. Then he gave more money to Lazarsfeld, and they pushed several books growing out of this kind of thing. So this in turn led to doing surveys, and these were the first surveys ever for politics. So those kinds of things that we do, you see every night in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so most of the social scientists have not done yet that. They're behind Lazarsfeld. He did this. He started in the late 30s. Okay, the economists. That is the view of the economists by many outsiders. Let's say by sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists. They say economists talk about money drives everything. It's a materialistic, reductionistic. And the answer, did Marx say that? No, Marx himself did not. This was Hegel. Sorry, this is not Hegel. Engel. Engel was the one who invented the term materialistic determinism. Okay, so the materialistic perspective, and imputing that to Marx. Marx himself didn't really answer. So I don't want to wander too much, but I want to give you. What I'm giving you with these examples are breaking away from the conception which still dominates much of our lives, and from journalists, from the media, from social science, from professors at this university. Most people still talk and think and write in those terms, but it's changing, and so I'm giving you examples of where and how this changed. Okay, let me stop with that. And for a second, and ask if anyone, we had your question talking about the Bohemian cultural scenes in the Chinese cities. Veblen, then I gave you the China, again, I was impressed because this was not I mean, China was recently predominantly it had many poor people. It has some very rich people at the top, but you know, the majority of poor people in China were quite poor. And so to have this in this kind of have this in China, I mean, it was not in, let's say, Italy or you know the children of Armani or something like this. These were photographers in China, and they said, if you want to give us a presentation or a paper or talk about Bourdieu's theory of this, we're going to refuse it. Why? Why?
You're saying China refused to talk about the paper?
Yes. This was a small group. This is not the president of China. This is maybe a couple of hundred people, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, who were focused on aesthetics, non-material. That is, they were saying the opposite of Hegel. I mean, they're saying, Marx and Hegel did have the term, we turn Hegel upside down. So in that sense, they were trying to create a materialism and an idealism that you had to choose between the one and the other. What I'm saying is we should do both. Both of these are interpenetrated. We should pay attention to that. And if we try to build the world only with money or only with material things, and you leave out what's in people's heads or the aesthetics, you're leaving lots out. But most of social science is doing that, and so we're trying to help look for ways of doing that. And that's the core ideas that I talked about, especially on Monday of Scenescapes. But it's also throughout the course. So following up, I'm trying to help you see this question I'm asking and bring it into, this is something I'm proposing you think about doing. And everything you read from, not just in this course, but in general, does it fit with what I know, with what I feel intuitively? And if it's in conflict, ask yourself, why is there a conflict? So how would this website in China not feature Bourdieu? You're almost answering. Just wander. Think about it out loud.
Well, I guess about your question before about seeing how, like, if anything we look at, like, we agree with or conflicts with what we think. Like, I do see how, like, in the Bohemian scenes, how there's the parallels. Like, they're talking about how northern cities, maybe self-expression is more important, and then, like, just in different regions, like, you see these differences or these variations in how these cultural scenes differ. And, like, you can see that here in America and different cities. You can be downtown Chicago and just another neighborhood in Chicago is completely different in the cultural scenes, self-expression, and that. So I do agree with that. I'm still a little confused about the question about the prior question.
I saw a sentence from Bourdieu recently, which it was a book called, I think, the Sociology of Art, and he in the sentence said that if people go to a museum, it doesn't matter what they see, but they can say they went to it, or that they're different. We're different from those people who never went to the Louvre or an art gallery or something like that. That is, what that sentence is illustrating is Bourdieu, his book, which makes his theme in the title, which we'll mention in passing, called distinction. The idea is that you want to make a distinction between you who are higher and other people who are lower, and you sort of flaunt your wealth in that way. Or you flaunt not just, that is, it's not just the money itself, but it's, in this example, you have the idea that you have been brought up enough to go to that museum, and people who don't have that background because their father's, mother's educational, social background was lower status. So Bourdieu is also imputing that to the children, to the next generation in doing some of that. Okay, the Chinese website is saying, we never are going to say that. That is, we don't care if the photograph is showing a castle and the castle is illustrating it belongs to a rich person. We want to say, is the picture, is the castle beautiful? We compare it to other castles, and then we say, or then they'll maybe talk about an hour. What is beauty? Well, okay, then they'll think about that. Well, there can be balance. How about which colors go together and why? So these are highly esoteric, aesthetic questions, and I don't want to push this too far, but I'm simply, I was shocked to find that this website existed, and especially to have, no Bourdieu. Okay. I knew Bourdieu very well myself when I was doing my PhD work. He was just a couple of years ahead of me, and so in terms of age, and so we used to argue a lot. I was the only American he knew, I think, for 7 years or so, and so privately we were very close. I was invited to his home for Christmas and so forth, but in public he threw tomatoes at me and so forth. Okay. All right. So the other themes, big or small. The big theme behind that was consumption. Where and how does this consumption transform many of the concepts, or can we bring that question of how is consumption different if we're looking at something like where you live, neighborhood you choose, the clothes you buy, college you go to, do you study more or less? Do you belong to a sorority or fraternity where they say if you work more than 3 hours a week, you're a geek. Okay. Yeah, I should even ask a question. When I was growing up in the old days, in America there was an ant that we could call Richard Hofstadter wrote a famous historian and book. It's called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life. And it traces back through the 19th and 20th century how there were big political demonstrations, and scandals, this and that, or movements, social movements, issues to do all kinds of things. But the point was, if some people were intellectuals, you wanted to attack them. And so one way would be that within a college, you would have traditionally fraternities, and the fraternity might say, we got to be here to have fun, to go drinking, to dance, so forth, listen to music, and if we only study if we don't study except to the extreme, 2 or 3 days before the exam, we'll work hard, we'll help each other pass the exam, we'll do well, and if we only get B's, that's okay. That, if you will, could be a simple stereotypical. Do you hear anything like that today on this campus? Any elements of that? Any residues historically? Or do you have friends who you were high school mates who've gone to a place like Indiana University, or if you're from Madison, they got a lot of big stuff like football, baseball, Basketball.
Yeah, a lot less studying going on.
Elaborate a little more.
I think it's just a different community, different environment, values a different thing than we do here. I think there's like little bits of it here in certain groups, but it's little bits largely.
What would be examples here on this campus?
I think you're probably right about the Greek life being less academically focused. Not in a bad way.
I think there's also an interesting split on campus between people who are very career focused and they aren't necessarily as intellectual as like the classic Chicago intellectual is. So while the intellectual or very academic side would focus on taking classes that are having discussion and work, this new like pre-professional culture is the opposite, and people are interested in taking easier classes or doing the least work that they can. And I also think that pre-professional side is more associated with like Greek life or certain RSOs on campus, so like finance clubs and stuff like that. So I do really see that split existing here.
I definitely do think there is like still a difference between like the person who does the least amount of work here versus the person who does the least amount of work at another school. Because like I just know there's people from my high school and who from my hometown who like I've talked to them and I'm like, oh, how's school going? And they're like, yeah, I've literally never gone to a class and never done anything.
Wow.
So there's definitely people who just try to make it. They'll show up for their exams. They'll show up for their midterms, they'll show up for their finals, take it, whatever they get is what they get, and that's it. And that's kind of like the other 4 or 5 days of the week, they're going out and partying, that's their experience at school. So I definitely think I don't think there's many people like that at this school, because I don't think you'd honestly make it through if that was your mentality. So I think there is still a difference there.
Okay. What's a term that we've used in the course to talk about and contrast these things for different schools? Political culture.
Yeah.
And you were getting at you talked about this when you talked about cities in the north and the south and so forth. Which of the three regions, or what are the three regions that Elazar talked about?
Like the northern China, southern China, western, eastern.
Okay, almost, but not quite. That is, the north includes Middle Atlantic and New England, and that's one of the big contrasts between the two. What's the institutional exemplar I mentioned of the Middle Atlantic? It's in New York. It's on Wall Street. Okay, New York Stock Exchange. Okay, so that's the quintessential. And this is the title of a book by Donald Trump on the contractor, focusing on making a deal and saying that we got a bad deal, so therefore we want to change the contract. That's a different conception, totally different conception of politics, of economics, and so forth. And the New Englanders focus much more instead on what? Why did they go to New England, and where were they from, those people? That is, that what Elazar does is to trace where these people came from and why they migrated to these regions within the U.S. So the Middle Atlantic people came from Amsterdam, London, where they're closer to stock exchanges, if you will. The New Englanders came from England, but some from the Netherlands. But what made that is, many of them were kicked out of England. That is, they were people who, in different battles, different political leadership changes in England, would say, if you want to be a lawyer and practice law, or you want to be a professor and teach at Oxford, or if you want to be a high-level banker, you cannot be a member of one of the so-called non-conformist nonconformist churches. That is, if you're a member of the Church of England, you're okay. But if you're part of the that is, you're a Calvinist, you can't. So Oxford professors would be fired, and so they would often they'd migrate to the Netherlands, or later on New England. Okay, so these were some of the intellectual leaders of this, but the general style was what made Calvinism different from the Church of England or from the Roman Catholic Church. This is the whole focus of a little book called what? The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Okay, who wrote the book? Yes, part of your general, yeah. I'd say half of what I teach in this course you could call general education. You all should know this, not just for one course, not just to pass the course and get a grade. You should be civilized. Okay. You should know about Max Weber and the Protestant ethic. You should be able to talk about your grandmother and discuss these kinds of things. Okay. So the South was the most different, and you had ships were creating staff who would be participants in different plantations. So we had owners of the plantations. There would be people who could be managers of the staff, but then the staff would be later on slaves, black slaves. When they were started, they were white, English, indentured servants was the title. And you were an indentured, if you stole a plate or a ring, you might have 5 years or 10 years of doing indentured service because you were a thief. Okay, so, but it wasn't, you were not a slave for life. It had a certain term to it. In that sense, it was different from being an African-American slave who came here later on. But then, after 1865, at least officially, slavery was abolished. But the conception as what was it? It was a guy I think in the first class was here from somewhere in Texas. Was that you?
No.
No, okay. Anybody live? Any of you three live in the South? Have any of you visited the South for more than a week?
Yeah.
And notice any differences?
I mean, I grew up in Southern California, so definitely a big difference. I visited a friend in a suburb of Dallas, and it does, like, I don't know how I'd place my finger on it. I guess it was different because I wasn't in like downtown Dallas, but it does feel like a different culture. Like a lot of the stereotypes were true. It's like everyone's driving big trucks and it's all kind of like that. But yeah, it was definitely, it felt different culturally. Maybe it felt a little faster paced. Like everything in Southern California feels a little more laid back, unless you go up to LA, which is a lot more chaotic. But that was kind of my experience.
Where'd you live in Southern California?
Like Orange County area.
So Orange County is okay. No, I was thinking of San Diego. No,
not quite that south.
Orange County is the most studied county in the world.
Really?
Mark Baldessari was the director of the Survey Research Center at Irvine, and he did surveys every year of the mayors, city council members, the citizens, average sample of the citizens of each of these towns in all of Orange County, year after year after year after year. And they went through from being Ronald Reagan, Republican, conservative on fiscal and social issues, to drastically moving in a much more generally democratic, but now very differentiated by different specific areas. Some people will live in one which is dominantly Korean, another is Chinese, and they'll send some of the elite families in China who will send kids who will live there and you'll have lots of schools that are there to prepare you to come to Chicago and Harvard and Yale and so forth. And those kids work very hard, and they are different from, let's say, Texas. Okay, so the regional differences is what I'm suggesting attending to, because when you learn a lot about yourself and about differences from place to place, when you see where and why they're different, or over time. So I'm glad to hear. I shouldn't say I'm glad. I'm pleased to hear you analyze and identify such things as your extreme anti-intellectualism is still existing, even though you made the point it'd be hard to get through the University of Chicago. Okay. All right. The point is, it still is an important part of life, not just in the U.S., but of where and how the different policy issues. I mean, if you're both running for president, but also making one neighborhood or one party, one that is a social party that you have fun with, what makes it different and why? And the identification, for instance, of amenities. Why are amenities important at all? But to have Ed Glazer to suggest that amenities are more important for cities and their dynamics than are market decisions. That is, things that you buy or sell or that you put money into is less important than clean air, crime, murders, drugs, etc., or the crossing the lights when the light is green. Do you break the law in that sense, or do you say, no, everybody crosses the street, we don't care, don't pay the okay? So the differences, it's a good essay question. Where and why are cities more successful in celebrating themselves by using other activities to play up their we talked about this with Yushan, who's written 10 papers, and I said, let's talk about one or two of your papers. And one that you mentioned first was the activities of cities which may make them more, what was your term?
Urban vitality.
Vital, yeah. Urban vitality. What's the urban vitality? Why did you write the paper about it? How does it relate to the course? How can we? What did you read and what did you find that was useful? And who you remember any of those analyses that we could learn from? And then what did you contribute in the paper? Or what might you or we think about going further? Urban vitality. What's that?
Yeah. Firstly, because
okay. Once you turn, can you put yourself in there? Or you want me to hold? Yeah, I'll hold on.
That's fine.
You can hold it too.
I'll just bring it over here. Okay.
That's good.
A little bit so we can see
Because my previous research related urban vitality is more about using add more resources to identify people's perception So from previous research, people more focus on using like
Just go a little slower, a little quicker.
okay.
From past research, people want what?
Yeah, from previous research, people more using like economic factor like a socio-demographic factor to identify the urban vitality, and also try to use in like resources distribution in city to identify urban vitality. But currently, when the technology joined too fast and people were using like social media platform and also different resources like Google review or some
No, say that again.
Google review, Google map review,
Google what?
Google map.
review.
Google Map.
Yeah, Google map. They people will leave some comment for this place, so we can like identify how people's perception for this place and how people.
But how does Google Map identify vitality?
Yeah, because if there are a lot of people trying to go this place, they will leave a lot of comment in this place, and also
You mean because of traffic?
yeah,
So I mean if you're driving in a car
not just driving
or
cars.
a bicycle or whatever, walking, you can see it measures traffic basically. You mean is that your?
No, just like you come to a park and you feel this place very nice and this survey is very good. So you maybe leave some content to give some people what you feeling about this place. So
Like the reviews.
yeah, like the reviews. So we can like try the people's emotion and emotion feedback, and also what specific topic people are very interested about. Like for in park, people more focus on like public service or green space. But in the other hand, when people leave some comment in like downtown, they may more focus on about like this restaurant have a very delicious food, or this place they are very interested in art activity. So people will focus on different topic, and we can learn a lot about from this context. And also, so we use this social media data source to identify the urban vitality as a new resources. And we can see based on our result, we can see a lot of from different city, people were more focused on different topic. Even in
Say that again. People from a different city.
yeah, people from different city have different perception for the same place. Even like for park, maybe in New York New York people were more focused on playground or life in city. But people from like Canada, they more focus on green space and also natural resources. So these two cities people have totally different perception for park, and also
Let me stop you for a second, which may or may not be your point. I'm not sure. Our Chinese participants have suggested nature should be added much more centrally in discussing scenes, because they say, for instance, the Chinese pay more attention to nature than you do in the West. Does that make sense to you, or how do you react to that sentence and statement? And if so, how might we do it, or have you done that? How could we capture the sense of nature and if say Chinese people in Chinatown or living in Canada or the U.S., do they act or do they like parks more, for instance, than non-parks in cities? that is, how would you react to that statement about it? And if so, why are the Chinese or some Chinese? Which Chinese are more sensitive, and what aspects of nature appeals?
I think the people living in city or downtown are more sensitive with natural resources because we have a lot of like very research about environment psychological things. So the people who live in the city area were more sensitive. Their perception were more sensitive with the nature or urban green space. But people living in like countryside, totally different perception. Yeah.
And so they want it because it's not what they have in a sense. They don't have as much. Okay, and for sure cities differ a lot in this respect. I mentioned we have a bit, and Mayor Daley too applauded planting trees. He said he planted 1 million trees to make Chicago more green and more nature oriented. By contrast, Tokyo. Tokyo has almost no parks. I mean, it's very built up everywhere. It seems. Paris has a lot of trees and grass and other things built in around the buildings and the like in ways that are sensitively and designed in those terms. And then of course, if you just live in a medium-sized or smaller city, these are more common. But I'm interested that your reaction, that the Chinese that is one of the persons who said this, the leaders, was I'll mention him by name because he's talked about it. Bo Chen, he's a professor at the University of Wuhan, professor of sociology, and they've done a lot of research on rural Chinese, small town, medium. So they think of nature as, I think, related to the small town and to the countryside, whereas you're really starting from the cities, which is very interesting. I mean, I'm surprised in the sense that's the opposite of what I hear. So I'm interested in elaborating why you or he might both suggesting that the Chinese may be very interested in nature, but you're in a sense he's saying that rural people want to have more the way they've already got, whereas you're saying the opposite. I think. Is that true? Am I right or am I misinterpreting?
No, maybe that's based on the data resources.
I've not read your paper, so that's why I'm asking. And you've got other papers, because you've got a paper on solar, don't you? There's something about green space and energy and the environment, and you've got things that deal with those kinds of issues, which are. But is that the green movements within, especially the European countries, have green parties. Here we have voluntary associations. Environmental organizations have more money than both of the political parties in the U.S. or say in England. There's a Friends of the Birds, I think it's called. They have more money than all the political parties in England. So Westerners, in the sense of the U.S. and England, have a lot of interest in the environment. So how do we connect that, fit that with nature in China? I mean, I'm genuinely asking is, I don't know. I'd love to learn. And if you published a paper that relates to this,
I think we still looking for autonomous satisfaction.
does it just sit a little clearer and slower?
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, so we got noise outside.
I think think we are still looking for someone to answer these things. For my paper, yeah, that's it.
What's the main point of the paper? This is the main theme is what? This is urban vitality or another paper?
Yeah, it's other papers.
Yeah, what's the title of the main focus?
The land use, how the POI is kind of like the different things related to urban land use. Yeah, it's like how land use affect the POI. In fact, different POI. Like if you
What's the word? I'm missing a word. PI?
POI, point of interest.
Point of interest.
Yeah, it's just like if they have a school or they have a restaurant, it's kind of one point in this place. But we call them as a point of interest or point, and we can divide them as different categories like education, business, public service, or commercial service. So we can see, based on the land use policy from the government, how this thing change the distribution of this POI, and also why these things happen. So we can see that they have very high explanatory power because it's very depends on the government's policy. It's when government decides for this place, they try to change the land use attribute, like from residential to commercial, and the POI will have a significant change between between the previous land. So I think for China it's more depends on government policy, but also some very small business like restaurant or they just like restaurant. They are very like board is depend on resident themselves. It's like if you have a empty space, you don't need to decide what's the function for this place, like how people to use this place. People will decide by themselves and try to transform the function for this place. So that's like two different ways.
Yeah, I've advised several aldermen in my neighborhood in Bronxville, and Tony Preckwinkle, who's now president of the Cook County Board, talked explicitly for a while of trying to convert all the land in the area, if possible, to be the lowest level of legal autonomy by which the owner could simply do whatever you want. So what she wanted to do was have the owners come to her and to the aldermanic review and to our committee to say what should the land be used for in order to be responsive to. And so she was concerned, for instance, with not having gentrification. She did not just want to have rich white people buy the land and drive out poor black people. And so there was one thing they did was they tore down high-rise, 20, 25-story low-income housing, which were very common on State Street. There's a whole, blocks and blocks like that. But we had a number of them as well in her area. So they replaced it with 3 stories, mixed income housing, where you had market rate, middle income, slightly subsidized, and then people who were basically former residents of low income housing. But they were very successful. And generally, and they were built attractively, physically. The infrastructure was attractively done as architecture, and that seems to have been a successful kind of policy. But another would be, she really hated the liquor stores, because the liquor stores attracted, 3, 5, 15 young men who would hang around for hours, and they might be selling drugs or other things, or taking bets, because people were there 24 hours. So she tried to close down the liquor stores, and then to try to change the street scene of the area. So I'm giving you these examples to say the same issues are being thought about, and she in that sense was the government, but she was what the aldermen in Chicago are sometimes referred to as little mayors. That is, the aldermen, and generally in the past in Chicago, each alderman could do a lot of what they wanted within their ward. And one reason was that they used to, the whole city was built on material exchanges. Material in the sense that they would give you cash or jobs that they would expect in return. What? If you give money to the alderman, or if you give money to the alderman, what gets exchanged? It's called a quid pro quo. Legal, or that is sort of illegal terms. This is also in the press about political candidates who are running for president these days. Giuliani recently. Giuliani lost a case, and they're listing as of yesterday, whatever. He had a penthouse suite in Manhattan, and this building, this housing was given to the people involved in counting and tabulating the votes in Atlanta, because they brought a lawsuit against Giuliani, who tried to say that Trump would in fact got more votes than they had reported. And they said, no, we did it legally, and they won the case, and the judge said, okay, we don't want money, we want his house. So in the house, then they're now making fun of this because it's so wild, extreme, conspicuous consumption kinds of items which are there. Okay, so I'm simply using headlines to say that they connect it. Okay. Any themes related to the syllabus, to the course? I would say look at the syllabus. Look at the big points which are there. We try to say that. I've said that section by section by section. But I would also then, look at the first few pages. Look at that last few pages of not just one or two of the readings, but look more of them, so you get a feel for how all the pieces fit together, and then try to push on as you've heard in this discussion to ask why does this paper say that? Why do we disagree? And so if we have potentially something like zoning, how does zoning work? And that's a big issue for cities. So, that what's the shape and what's the focus of all right. Kentuckville karaoke, what's the point of that title? Anybody? If that's a concept to identify. Did Tugville do karaoke? Or who was Tugville in terms of this course? Alexis de Tocqueville. He's a Frenchman. He came to America around 1815, something like that. He wrote a book called, anybody know about this? This is general culture. You ought to know this stuff.
Democracy in America?
Sorry?
Democracy in America?
Exactly. Okay. Was it about karaoke? Or should I let's check? What was one of the big themes which I've talked about here and which you may have known from before the course? What's one of the big themes of what was democracy and what was it and how was it different from France in those years, and what might that bring it to France when those things came there, and what might that be? Yeah.
Well, I guess kind of the big things were like equality and liberty. Like from France, at least, you know, we started to build the country on the ideas of like freedom of speech, and that like it was true democracy, and that everyone actually had a say in the government, and then also just like kind of highlighted the importance of like civic associations in American life. And I guess the book also is like a little bit about like potential strengths and weaknesses of the democratic system.
Okay. How about the civic associations? Anyone want to comment on that? I mentioned the example of Massachusetts farmers. What did I say there? I think that was probably a week ago or so. We have two Massachusetts farmers. Say one has cows and beef. The other is growing corn and potatoes. The animals are eating the corn. So what can they do? Build a fence. But no one wants, it's work to do the fence, so you say, let's discuss it together, and build, maybe you're only just two people. There may not be any zoning, may not be any government which tells you, but you may have said, why don't we work together, and this is better for us both. It's not corruption, it's not buying votes, I mean, it's just two people doing something which they can share together. And that's a quintessential example which Tocqueville said, this is democracy in America, and we don't find this in France. People don't do this. Okay, so what leads to people doing things, and concept which in English, and I'm saying English, using terms like commonwealth. What's the full name of the state of Massachusetts? Anybody know? It's not called the state, it's called the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. A conception that you don't think about doing what's best for you or gives you more money or whatever. You think about what's good for the world, okay, or at least the state of Massachusetts. If we take it a step further, if we have in the book, and Tocqueville karaoke, three kinds of theories in a sense: economic growth, political democracy, and the arts. And the point is, the first two theories of how economic growth came from Balzac, Baudelaire, is Bohemia, and innovation is how artists do new things, and that's the Jane Jacobs kind of argument. New ideas are the drivers of cities and its economies being grown. being driven by these new ideas. Okay, it doesn't work. As we pointed out when we talked with 15 about 15 people here, they're mostly Asian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and they say, what do you think about Bohemia? And what do they say? What's Bohemia? Never heard of it. Okay, so can Tuckville, so if Tuckville is saying the Massachusetts farmer and herdsman, whatever, get together. If that works in democracy for Massachusetts, how do they have a sense of participation and civility in Asia? One of the most common, which people talk about, is karaoke. That is, they work together, but then the people at the end of the workday often go out and have drinks and dinner together, and then they'll sing songs. They sort of quasi-leisure time activity, if you will. But can we join the Asian tradition of karaoke with the civility thesis of Tuckville? That's the point of the book. That is, how in turn do we build civility or legitimacy, or where and why do people say, yes, I'm pleased and proud to be Chinese? What makes them, why are they Chinese? What makes them different if they're in the Massachusetts Commonwealth in contrast to, say, Texas? These are political, cultural questions, but they're bigger than that, because as you can see, this links with economic growth, with stability. At the end of our hour, we'll be hearing more noises in the hall, but we've got a smattering of questions, and we'll have the exam. And after the exam, the rest of the course will be more open-ended, and we will pursue individual topics. So as you review, think about here. So here are 4 or 5 things. This is interesting. Just try to, why is Madison really different in terms of this or that? Or what is nature really important? All kinds of things we can pursue. One last sentence. I used to feel as a student when I was studying for an exam, I had more of a sense of how all the pieces fit together. It was a wonderful feeling. That's why we're reading that book. Now I see how these things fit together. Enjoy that and appreciate it, and sort of try to get a feel for where and how all the pieces fit together in these courses. And these sections which fit together in the course. And we'll go from there.
Just to confirm, the midterm we do it online.